Tell the best version of the truth.
I like that. Not just the truth, but the best version of the truth.
Yeah.
All right, Sanjay, give me the flip of that. Give me some bad advice on developing trust.
Letting your sales reps talk about security.
Well, hopefully they're educated enough.
Uneducated.
Uneducated. All right, give me some worse advice, Brian.
Just prompt AI to do everything and don't review it before you take it out to customers.
That's some pretty bad advice. Let's get this sucker going.
Get ready. It's Super Cyber Friday.
Welcome, everybody. Today's topic is hacking customer trust. That's what we want to do today. An hour of critical thinking on how to move beyond questionnaires and to demonstrate trust in real time. That is a key thing we want to do here. And I liked Brian's example, who's one of our guests here. He's the director of trusting quality at Box. The best example of the truth. What a great answer to that question. And also we have Sanjay Podval, who actually has good advice on this subject. He's the staff product manager over at Vanta. And guess what? That's the company that's sponsoring this awesome episode. Vanta has been a spectacular sponsor of the CISO series, and we love having them on board. Thank you very much. All right. For those of you who've been here before, you know how this works. Lots of different ways to participate. We have the chat room, which many of you have already discovered. If you have not, many of you are online. Please go ahead and discover the chat room. Submit how not to prove your trust to customers. That's your bad idea. And then submit tips on how to actually build trust. And so all you have to do is label it either bad idea : or 10%, and we will find it. Worst advice, Adam. Start a land war in West Asia. Yeah, well, that would be bad. I don't know if that has to do with the customer trust, but it is bad advice just in general. If you'd like to join us on video, just say, bring me on, ask a question, make a comment, ask a question. Now, if you look at the little icons on the far right, there's a series of little icons. One has a speech bubble with a question mark in it. Click on that, ask your questions. Please start asking questions now. And as we get lots and lots of them, please vote for your favorite question as well. Here's our schedule: the good advice, bad advice, bad idea, 10% tips. We'll play the public interest. We'll play the Department of Yes. We'll have our last questions and advice, and we'll have our meetup as well. And if you have never come to our meetup at the end of the show, it's a ton of fun. It's not this environment. We do another environment, sort of simulates a virtual party. Please, I want you to come. So stick around. Whatever plans you have in an hour, cancel them and come to this. All right. And the very last thing I do want to mention is two things. Is that we have two. Did we actually mention both of these? No, we didn't mention both of these. So we have two things that are happening. So right now, if you look at the bottom of the screen, our May 3rd event is going to be hacking the value of GRC, an hour of critical thinking on how compliance can kickstart your work program. And anytime you can click on that link, it will not take you out of this chat. You'll be able to register for that event and still be in this chat. Please stay in this chat. Don't go anywhere. But that's going to swap also to the 426 episode. The one we don't have a show on 419. Just, so next week we're dark. But 426 is hacking your cybersecurity career. There is no one here that's watching that is not interested. That was a double negative. Everyone here is watching is interested because everyone here has some form of cybersecurity career. So that is of interest to everyone. I know it is. So please join us. We have two amazing guests for that. But we also have two amazing guests here as well. So that's going to be up there. It's going to be flopping back between the two of them. And for some bizarre reason, we have that. Let me hear stage controls evenly split everyone on stage. Now we're going to do it. There we go. Now we're all evenly split. Let's get to our subject or question at hand. And I'm going to ask the very basic question of you, Sanjay. What are the classic pain points in proving that you are actually doing security? You're doing security well and that people should trust you. Like, where is the toughest point to prove, I guess, Sanjay?
Yeah, I think ultimately that we've seen it, and I've seen it selling at multiple different companies, enterprise companies. It's just like, how are you as a company confident in one, what you do? How do you prove what you say you do? And three, then how do you make sure that stays up to date in terms of as things change? One, your products change, your infrastructure changes, everything stays out of date, goes out of date, right? You change a database, it may not be encrypted anymore, right? And I think building trust in the ability for you to have confidence in what you say you do and continuously to prove how you say you do those things is becoming increasingly more important, and especially important with larger software buyers who want this real-time comfort and control.
Brian, how do you deal with this issue, and what it becomes the biggest issue for you for building trust in terms of like just it's complicated to explain or it's tough to get across? I mean, however way you want to sort of define it.
Yeah, I think it's not so much the complication or difficulty to get across. I think there's just so many parameters that buyers are legitimately looking at. And particularly when we're talking about humans handling all of this, how do we represent that information in terms of taking, human to human interface? It just frankly becomes a lot.
Okay, you know what, and I may end up actually skipping to what Vanta does here specifically, but I think the problems with the questionnaire model is the volume number, and I think there's simpler ways to present it. This is what user interfaces can do, is that they can present a lot of information in one shot and also develop that as best. Sanjay, what have you seen in that in terms of how can I present a lot of sort of information at one time that builds trust? That like they say a picture says 1,000 words. Like a single screen can hit X number of points of trust, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's two things. I think one, just going back to the security questionnaire, I think what everyone's seen in the market is like everyone's asking very, very similar things. And when you send a spreadsheet over, the language of how people ask things are very different, but they're trying to convey the same point, right? They talk about 7 different ways around encryption or vulnerability scanning. And it's really, really hard to have like a one size fits all for all of those problems, right? You say it's one way, you see it one way, and another question you see another way, and you get really confused as a company. I think going back to I'll answer this first and go into the second question. I think with the advent of like LLMs, right, you're able actually to synthesize, hey, these 10 questions are actually really similar. The answers to this are actually, you can actually generate the answers to those 10 questions. And so you normalize the translation between that, which makes it much more easier to respond to questions, right? Or at least take a first pass at those questions. And we've seen that really take off with all of these AI question automation tools. Quality is still a problem and a challenge, but I would ultimately think that going forward, as things get better and better and you have a better knowledge base, like those things should be able to be automated. The second piece is just publicly displaying in one place what you do, right? I think people have a ton of different trust centers out there on their security pages in different places, in their SOC 2, right? And people have to go find these things and find the things that they care about. I think with the concept of trust centers, there are a lot of different types of trust centers out there. You can centralize all information in one place, allow people to search against those. And I think, again, with all this AI capabilities, you can actually search across corpuses of content, not just direct search, but saying, hey, instead of looking across, I don't know, a 100-page SOC 2 report, right? You can pull out and synthesize the information and get that access to that answer when you want it.
There was something I saw years ago, and this goes maybe back 3-4 years ago, before trust centers became popular. And I remember seeing what it was. It was just like, it was a page of like how we deal with privacy. Now it was how we deal with privacy, but it was written in very plain English. Not like we see these kind of documents, but it's just monstrous legalese, endlessly long. Nobody ever reads it. And oh God, I wish I could remember who did this. And if anyone knows what I'm referring to, please pipe up. But it hit the industry so hard, like, holy crap, why is it taking this long to simply explain privacy so everyone can read and consume it? And there was like series of bullet points. It wasn't a lot of copy, and it like got across, because really people have a simple attitude of privacy. Yes, you need the legalese to protect your ass come day in court, but most of us are not communicating through, lawyers at the time. We just basically want to know what's going on. Brian, how are you guys communicating like your issues, or how are you dealing with this in terms of so people can digest the information simpler, I guess is my question.
Yeah. So, first of all, we do have a trust center. And so we put up that information. We naturally send customers there first. the reality of the marketplace, and would love to hear, there's a lot of people on right now, would love to get their perspective. What I have certainly found is that as much as we try to push back on specific questionnaires and, use commonly known templates like the SIG and the CAKE, we still have those customers, especially, frankly, some of the larger customers that want to have their specific questions answered. And to Sanjay's point, they often are different versions of the same thing, right? But I think that that's something that all of us in the industry, frankly, is grappling with, is how do we push back? We want to push back, but we want to be careful not to push back too hard, because at the same time, we are trying to support sales, trying to support renewals. And these are quite legit questions, right? So there's a relationship there. And so we don't want to take too hard of a stance, right? It's more of a collaborative effort. And so we find ourselves doing this a lot. But specifically your question, how are we trying to kind of overcome that? A lot of times we'll take the path of putting together knowledge papers. And so if you kind of combine some of these different questions, or kind of categories or families of controls, and speak to that and make it more of a narrative where you're kind of telling the story and bringing people in, that seems to resonate a lot with customers.
Can you give me one example of that? And again, I know there's a lot of, but give me one example of what you mean by a narrative and telling a story like that, because I love that.
Like, what do we do with encryption and who actually has access to the customer's data? I mean, like, fundamentally, that's a big part of why this industry exists, right? Like, cloud has won, SaaS market isn't going anywhere, but at the same time, customers have very, very legit questions. What are you doing with all this sensitive data? And, the data, the content is their business, right? Mm-hmm. And so if we're able to put together in a knowledge paper and call out, how it is encrypted from end to end, who actually does and does not have access, what are the steps that need to get taken? And, effectively, from our perspective, it means that the customer has to say and, give that green light to go forward, and it's heavily monitored, et cetera. And we can do it in such a way that even as we're using public cloud service providers, it's encrypted to the point where they're also not having access, right? And so that carries with it a degree of assurance. So that's an example of kind of a story that customers really, really want to hear and know and understand.
This is a nice tip off to James Sparenberg's quote here for a 10% better tip. I'm going to throw this to you, Sanjay. And I love this. And I'd love to know if you've actually done this, because this seems like this question cuts through right away. It says, ask your either client or vendor, either side here, this question: what do you think is important for my organization to know about your organization? That's great.
Yeah, no, I think it's great, because I think what happens there and what we've seen is you ask people what they want, right? And it depends on the buyer, right? I think there's a certain set of buyers that are saying, I want to go check the box because that's my program.
But let me pause you there for a second. But it's more than saying, what do you want? Because people often don't know what I want.
Yeah.
But the question is, what's important for me to know about you? And you can get what they want out of that. But go on. I'm sorry, Sanjay.
Yeah, I think it's right. It's just like, okay, like, 4 sets of companies, they want to double down and talk about, hey, how do you handle AI? Does data leave your systems? Do you train models, right? And to each one of those sets of buyers, there's specific things they're actually looking for, right? And the things that make them stay awake at night, and being able to tailor those experiences or that type of content to those types of buyers, I think is really important. It's not really one size fits all. I think in the concept of trust centers, you can group organizations things around vulnerabilities, around encryption, around like your people processes, but being able to say and double down on areas where people care or ask questions around is a really interesting piece. And I think one of the places where you're going to see this transition is trying to make your public trust center or your public trust center, right, be an input into your program as well. Right. I think when you see a public facing site, you don't really know what people are asking questions against, what they're looking for. But the more and more you can turn all of that information that like people are looking into, it allows you to like turn your security program or your public trust center into an input into your security program. Increase the content there.
Let me ask you actually about that. Does your trust center Advanta, you're saying they don't know, but maybe, people are interacting with it.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you've got data how they interact. You must know what they're looking at, right?
Mm-hmm. Like, I think the interesting thing is seeing what content people download, right? People mostly download your SOC 2, but then we list our own policies, we list a pen test, we list like network diagrams, right? And to see what people, the long tail of things that people click on and download is really interesting. Also seeing what pages people go to will tell you around. What we've seen is like, oh, people are much more gravitating towards privacy now, right? And privacy is becoming really important. How do I handle data, especially in European countries where GDPR is so big? I think the second thing that we're doing is we'll be enabling like a chat interface within a trust center. So you can ask questions of a trust center. What we found there is like, you can actually group those questions and group that intent and say, hey, most of 10 of these customers, large customers, are asking about your encryption policies, or these customers are asking about your data deletion policies. And I think with that, you can use that as input in order to make your trust center better, but also use that as an input to say, hey, maybe we need to do more stuff around here because people are asking about these questions.
All right, we have our first game. Here we go.
Do you know what others are thinking? On the public interest.
All right, here we go. Public interest. Here's how this game is played. It's going to make perfect sense to you the moment you see it. Most average monthly search queries. What do you think it is? Proof or control? And I will stress again, I've said it many, many times before. There is only 4 questions here. If you get 4 to 4, it's very, very impressive because it's pretty darn hard to do. So Sanjay, Brian, what do you think? Proof or control? What do you think gets more searches?
I'll go with control for sure.
All right, for sure. He's confident on that. Sanjay?
Control.
You're
I
both
also use that
control.
word so many times. So.
All right, control. And it is? Hold on. Whoops. It is? It is control. Very good. All right, 1 and 1, both of you guys. Good job. Next one. Protocol, guidance, or standard? What do you think? Protocol, guidance, or standard? I think
Guidance.
I haven't seen this. I'm going E myself.
I'm going E.
I'm going D, guidance.
Ooh.
All right. Guidance, standard. I'm thinking a lot of people, what is the standard for this? What is the standard for that? That's why I'm thinking that E is it.
Well, this is where I cheated.
Oh, it is. And he forgot to highlight it green, but it is standard. Guidance
Wow.
applied with protocol. There you go. All right. Good job. Standard it is. All right. So 2 for Brian, 1 for Sanjay.
No, 2 for me, 1 for Brian.
No. I lost.
Yeah.
You lost. I'm sorry.
I thought it was guidance.
Your guidance. I'm sorry. My apologies.
Yeah.
So Sanjay, 2 for you, 1 for Brian. My apologies there. All right. Context, remediation, visibility. This one's a tough one.
Remediation.
Remediation.
I'm going to go with remediation. People want to know how to fix things.
But I think they'd say remediate. And just so you know, remediate would be different than remediation.
Oh.
Yeah, it's not going to be the same thing. It's the actual word here. So you still want to say with remediation, both of you?
Yeah, I think so.
You're going remediation too, Brian, still?
Sure.
All right. So 2 for Sanjay, 1 for Brian. And we are still 2 for Sanjay, 1 for Brian. There we go. All right, last one here. By the way, no one's going 100% here. Assurance, privacy, validation, or trust. Which one you think it is?
Sadly, I'm going to say privacy.
Sadly, I was going to say the same thing, privacy.
I would love to say trust because I
Same.
see the others as a subset of trust, but I think it's going to be privacy. And Sanjay's quite clever because now that he's ahead, he's just doing the same ones as me, so he's going to win.
I see. There you go.
Yeah, very clever guy.
Thinking ahead. And it is? No, it was
Wow.
trust.
Oh my God.
You
know what?
For us.
Sanjay still wins.
Yeah.
A lot of people pick trust here.
I was thinking
Did
about
anybody
it.
go for a
Yeah.
4-4-4 there? Jesus. Anyone?
Oof.
Nobody? I got 1 out of 4. There you go.
Should have
This
followed
makes
my
me,
heart.
Still
this makes
like
me much
you.
happier that trust is out there.
Well, it's
Well,
trust
not
about
bad.
it's
3 out of 4.
relationships. They're thinking about relationships.
All right. Now, I want to use this opportunity to everybody else because, Sanjay, you brought up some really good points about trust centers and about using them. And I want to put up a poll right now. Is it up right now? Let's see here. I'll make it visible myself. Would you like a warm handoff to Vanta? And by the way, this poll is going to be up for the entire talk here. We have 2 options that are pretty much variations of yes, I would like to talk to them. So please go ahead, select either item of the poll either one, you're going to get a warm handoff to Vanta, and we'd love to we'll give it to you next week. So please go in at any time during this. And also, if you looked at the bottom of the screen, you can still register for the meetup that we're going to have, or the Super Cyber Friday we're going to have in 2 weeks, not next week, but 2 weeks. And that's Hacking Your Cybersecurity Career. We'll have the other one, the 531, coming up very soon. All right. We do have a question, only one question. Get more questions in, everybody. This one comes in from Dustin Sachs, who asks, what are the most important things to include in a trust center? Here, let me actually show this. But that most vendors fail to include. This one I'm throwing to you, Sanjay, here. That's a really good question. And I'm assuming you guide them, but maybe they don't ask the question, or you're telling them like they don't even consider. What do you think?
Yeah, I think if the most important things are your compliance badges, your documentation, some FAQs. Sub processes are really, really important. I think what we've seen happen most is, I think it's privacy. I think going back to the term, I think especially with people that are selling in more regulated industries and in Europe, there are controls that buyers want to know around your privacy. And they are, as that buyer, they are required to be able to prove that their vendors do X, Y, and Z things as part of their compliance standards or as part of their audit, right? And I think we see a lot of the blending between, hey, this is a trust center for security, but can I make this into a privacy trust center as well? And so privacy is around, how do you handle data? How do you handle the AI, for example, or data deletion, or how do your sub-processors change, and what access of data do they have? Those are things that end up coming up at the end of security reviews as well, that we've seen people try to front load, but usually often don't necessarily know always about.
By the way, Francisco did go 4 for 4 today. I'm throwing this to you, Brian. What's interesting is that privacy for some organizations, Apple most notably, has become a product differentiator. How have you seen that play itself out? And is it actually working?
I think it absolutely matters. I mean, and clearly we all know that there's sort of different geographies, as in Europe, that it is that much of a huge deal. I would say, though, there's this balance between, is it a differentiator versus table stakes? And, I actually see privacy as being more table stakes. But
the thing is, you can crank up the privacy dial. Like the privacy dial isn't an on-off. It's a fluidity to it as well. Like what level of privacy you're building and offering, don't you think?
Oh yeah. I mean, from the product perspective, absolutely. And we're seeing that writ large right now with AI, the focus of kind of expansion and growth and market share versus kind of privacy and security issues. So, to me, I personally see it as a differentiator. I mean, just thinking about myself as, making decisions out there as a consumer, to me, it matters. But I think that there's a lot of variability across the market in terms of how much it matters. And I also think it may matter different generationally. If you've got people coming out of school right now, they may be thinking about privacy different than, say, me or you guys having a little bit more experience. So I don't know, maybe I'm evading the question, but I personally see it as a differentiator, but I don't know that the marketplace completely agrees with me.
Well, we see it a little bit even in the compliance side and the automation side. I think you see standard.
And when you say a little bit, you mean the differentiator angle.
Yeah. I think we start seeing, like, when people have, like, all these states now have their own privacy laws, like CCPA, the U.S. Data Privacy Act, and we're starting to see that, hey, if you have those standards, if you can prove that, it actually does play a difference in how people perceive, like, oh, especially as early startups, right? I think early startups are still working to build their compliance posture. They're still working to get all the controls in place, but they're just the outward investment saying, hey, we are committed to doing this, I think is paying dividends for companies that do invest in this. But obviously investing, it depends on you don't have to overinvest just for the sake of doing it, but as it relates to, like, your company and what data you process and what you do.
Mm-hmm. All right. Oh, I have a few more questions here that have come in. I want to address them. And one of them specifically for you, Sanjay. What would you, Vanta, recommend, who would you, Vanta, recommend own and support the Trust Center? So whose job is it to manage it, I guess?
Mm-hmm. This is two answers to this question. I think one is, it is generally the security team that manages all the inbound requests, right? And so you have sales reps, you have AEs, you have SEs, you have customer success managers that are coming in with bespoke questionnaires, and usually what we've seen is it funnels through the security team, and they have to adapt and answer these. And so we've seen it as the security team spins up the trust center, they keep all the content up to date, they create the workflows and the automations around that to automate access requests to different types of customers or profiles, and we see them then be able to quantify the value of that trust center upwards in terms of the time saved, the dollar saved, the revenue attribution. I don't know if Brian has a different take here, having run a lot of those programs, but and then the second piece of it is I think it actually does also ladder up into like the CISO org, right? Like how can you demonstrate the visibility of my public brand as well, right? And I think we're starting to see that a lot more of like, oh, I want my security to be a brand. I want it to be approachable, not scary. And we're starting to see the blend of like, hey, marketing, security together, but also at the core piece of it's like the automation and the time savings.
I'm going to throw this question from Chad Beckman, who's with TrustMap, actually. This question to you, Brian. Is a trust center a formal requirement to work with a vendor? I can't believe it's formal currently, but I don't think anyone really needs to explain what it is anymore. I think, a few years ago it was kind of a novel concept, and I think everyone's sort of on board with the concept. Yes, Brian?
Yeah, so I'm seeing it very similar to you. I don't see it as a quote unquote formal requirement the way, you would see, for example, a specific control. It's just kind of, if you don't have a trust center these days, how are you actually in business? I mean, even
well, the lack of a trust center is a lack of trust right there, because it's becoming an industry standard.
It's almost kind of like it's such a built-in expectation. I mean, Sanjay earlier was talking about, startups looking at SOC 2s and privacy and things like that. I mean, to me, it's a lot less of a lift to actually start that trust center and start to tell the story even before you get some of those certifications. And that's a way of demonstrating to your customers that trust is something that really matters. Going back to the point you made earlier about, is privacy table stakes or a differentiator? I mean, we could expand that to sort of trust itself. To what extent is this becoming something that just we all need to do? It's a built-in expectation.
You must get customers saying that to you, Sanjay. Like, we're seeing you because we have to do this kind of a thing. Like, do you get that? Like everyone's saying, where's your trust center? And we don't have one. And so like, that's why we're talking to you.
Well, I'll be honest. I think generally the companies like Vanta and these compliance automation companies have actually oversold sometimes the concept of needing a SOC 2 and needing your compliance certifications. But that still doesn't preclude you from saying, hey, I have some policies and I have some things in place to like prove that I do these things. You may not be ready for SOC 2 in the investment that it is. But what I'll tell you is like an interesting example is we had maybe it's a couple of years ago when we first launched our Trust Center product, we had an early stage customer that was in Canada. I think there were 10 to 15 people selling to large financial institutions. They were in a proof of concept with the Royal Bank of Canada, right? Or RBC. And this company was like, oh, we don't have our SOC 2, but we do actually have a trust center where we put, this is our progress to date towards those things. And it was real-time monitored through like the Vanta's control monitoring. And this bank, and it was surprising to us, like the buyers at the Royal Bank of Canada were like, oh, we don't expect you to have this yet. Like, you're an early stage company, but the fact that you're going above and beyond and saying, I do X, Y, and Z things transparently was like, oh, we would never do this, but we're willing to move forward in a proof of concept because we know you take this seriously. So I think the concept of saying that you take something seriously and you demonstrate like outward that, hey, this is important to me, it's not just an afterthought, is actually starting to pay dividends, even with larger buyers that are becoming more and more sophisticated.
I think enough people saw because we've seen the classic response after a breach, where the company's first response is privacy and security is very important to us, and like the only time you hear it is after a breach. But this is the way to be proactive about it, but saying privacy and security is important to us before a breach, and God willing, maybe not a breach, as well. As you're nodding your head, Brian. Yes.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's trust is something we know fundamentally as humans, right? It's kind of wired into us. We're making decisions related to trust every time we interact with people. Just, people joining this show, they have a history with it. They trust things that are being said. And so if you go ahead and have that trust center and you put together some of this documentation and you're proactive, then when something happens, and the reality is stuff happens regardless, then companies, customers, people will be more likely to trust the information you share because it's part of an ongoing relationship instead of the very first time they're hearing words like trust and privacy. Then it all just kind of sounds like marketing and positioning, and we're sort of wired to sort of distrust that.
I want to quote right here. Justin said this: having a trust center needs to be marketed internally and externally toward the organization. I very much like that comment here. And then I just want to throw this question out that's very apropos to what you were just saying, Brian, here, and it comes from James Sperrenberg. How do you prevent your trust center from becoming just more boilerplate? That is a damn good question. How do you avoid that? Because I can see it falling into that pretty darn fast. Sanjay, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, I think this is where it's a blessing and a curse in some ways, right? I think there's a model of static content, right? There's static content that's on a website. You can kind of say whatever you want to say with static content. Someone will challenge you eventually and you'll be like, okay, do I actually do this? And I think that's where I like over-promising sometimes doesn't necessarily work, or it shouldn't work to a potential buyer. I think what's interesting with this rise of continuous monitoring, right? Like there are controls that are continuous monitored, there is data that's continuous monitored, there are tests that are back it up. I think being able to show more of a real-time look at your security posture, your compliance posture, your privacy posture is becoming really, really interesting because people do want a third-party, first-party look into your data, right? But they want to do it in a way that is approachable and not so, like, it's not too much, right? And I think you see these products out there, third-party monitoring tools, right, that are everyone's used, that are somewhat extortionist, right? But I think these customers, are starting to become, or vendors are trying to become a little bit more open to saying, hey, I want to be more transparent about the data that I show. I'm willing to pull back the layers and say, hey, this is exactly how we do our encryption. This is the protocol. And like exposing some of the real-time testing, I think is an interesting model going forward. It's not for everyone right now, but I think you'll start to see the industry change into more dynamic and real-time security posture, similar to how status pages are, right? Status pages tell you your uptime. They tell you like all these different real-time information. I think you're going to start to see the same thing come with trust centers, or they are there with trust centers, but continue to be exposed out with more and more layers of visibility.
By the way, just reminding everyone, the bottom of the screen says Hacking the Value of GRC. That's our May 3rd event. That's just before RSA. So you should all be able to come to that. We are actually not going to do a show the week of RSA. That'd be May 10th. But we'll have one the week before. And I believe the week after, not the week up, but the week after. So go ahead and click on that link right there to register for that event. Again, it will not take you out of this. All right. Let me go to my questions. Get some more questions in, everybody. Look, let me say this, because we're saying trust centers, assuming everyone knows what the heck that is. Sanjay, could you just give me a quick 20, 30-second definition of what a trust center is for everybody?
Yeah, I think a trust center is just a public-facing page. At first, it's a public-facing page where you can go put your compliance certifications, FAQs, your sub-processors, your documents with real-time control monitoring, potentially, if you use Vanta. But I think the other piece of it that we're not covering is like the workflows behind the scenes, right? There are documents that you don't want to be publicly available. And like, if you're a customer, you get access to it. So I think the problem here is like publicly being able to deflect questions, but for buyers being able to request documentation, get that workflow internally, automate that.
It's kind of a slow reveal, if you will.
Exactly. Based on your persona.
Needed. All right. So let me ask first, Brian, this question in terms of, by the way, if you haven't voted on the poll to get your warm handoff to the wonderful people over at Vanta, please make sure you do that. Just go to the little bar chart. I didn't mention that. There's a little icon that's a bar chart. That's your polls. Click on that, and we'll give you a nice little warm handoff to them. But Brian, let's go to that part of the layers underneath, what we don't see publicly. What has been the troublesome part of that aspect of the Trust Center?
So I think if I'm understanding the question right, so essentially, what do companies need to do behind the scenes in order to support a thriving trust center, right?
Right.
And
Like essentially more than a static front page, that it has some depth, that it works for all levels of engagement, from the person who's just publicly browsing to the person who's interested in becoming a customer, or the person who is currently a customer. Like, how does it work at all those different levels?
yeah, okay,
And,
right.
but I mean, I don't want you to answer greatly. What I want to know is, what's the hardest part of that? Excuse me. Boil it down to one or two things.
Yeah, I mean, the hardest part, no surprise for all of us, is just kind of, staffing and focus. And so there's also the question of, for a lot of companies, how is the trust center supported? Where does it actually fit in? Because oftentimes the website, particularly if a company has their own trust center, is managed through marketing. And then this is kind of getting into the details, but that's what you're asking about. Who within, like, which marketing group actually owns this? Because there usually isn't, except at much larger companies, a group that's kind of focused in on trust marketing, and it's not necessarily product, it's not events. So where does it focus? And then all of the work typically done by a combination of the GRC organization, the legal organization, the security organization. They could have different names, but those three stakeholders tend to be the largest contributors to it. And so to be able to coordinate and gather the information and package it up and get it onto the trust center for groups that often don't actually own the website itself. And so I think that gives sort of an opening to these various companies, startups, et cetera, that are trying to make it more of a plug and play off the shelf environment. So you don't necessarily have to work through marketing. You can run it yourself. So anyhow, I may have taken that in a different place than you were
It's all right.
asking.
But Sanjay, you were nodding your head a lot through that.
Yeah.
And then I want to bring up something that Katie just said. Go ahead, Sanjay.
Yeah, it's just like, I think keeping things up to date, right, is really tricky. People get out-of-date resources. Working with your web marketing team to go update something. Oh, I have a new standard, right? Takes time. Like, even you think adding some of your website will take a minute, right? But even at any company, it's going to take a month because maybe there's a web dev team, maybe there's something that's in a backlog. And then having control and making sure the security team or whoever's managing that security program has a place to constantly update, keep things up to date, and make sure that's reflected externally is, I think, really, really important. Especially when you have the go-to-market teams that are referencing that content. You always want them to reference the most up-to-date content. I think we found that as challenging, and we wanted to empower this new wave of startups, right? They're trying to empower the security team to actually own the stuff, dedicate the processes, and then publicly display this so that it's consistent and up-to-date.
Katie Rowcliffe has this great quote here that I think it's an interesting way to look at the trust center. It said, my previous employer used the trust page as a way to say, quote, if you're this type of organization or handle this type of data, I'm assuming not the kind we like, mosey right along, cowpokes, we are not the platform for you. Have either of you work with trust centers that make it clear, like, we operate like this. If you operate like this is not the connect. We're not going to be the match made in heaven.
I will say this, I have seen a couple trust centers where people put in more of it may not be like ESG type related content, but it could be like social governance. But people do actually put like anti-piracy and those pieces of content and policies of like how they handle that and work with companies, et cetera. So I haven't explicitly seen it, but I've started to see these trust centers be like, oh, we can start moving outside of security and into legal ethics as well. So not explicitly asking for this, but I think I can see the direction where this could head.
All right. Go ahead.
Just to add on, I have not personally been part of using the trust center to tell customers that we're not for them. I try to look at it as a positive spin of the reasons they should go with us.
It's not for everybody, but I just thought that was an interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting. All right, we got a call that came in.
Hello, welcome to the Department of Yes, where no request is ever rejected.
All right, this gentleman unfortunately just left. He just posted that he had to go, but he had a bad idea here. We're playing the Department of Yes, and no matter how bad these ideas are, Um, you have to tell me why you actually want to do it. And by the way, this bad idea is actually used in one industry that I know very well, and I'll explain how they pull it off. And I must say, it drives me crazy, but somehow they do pull it off. And this is a bad idea from Chad Beckman, again of TrustMap, who said, charge extra for the user manual. Why do you want to do this? Sanjay.
Which ones? Sorry. Charge extra for the user manual.
Why do you want to do this?
I mean, make money. I mean, make your security a revenue generating.
Yes, but aren't you going to irritate your... Yes, but can you sell this to me a little bit more of why we want to do this? I mean, I'll give you a quick yes.
Yeah.
If you don't sell me more on this, you're going to get something bad.
Fine. Usually when people ask stuff, they want to check the box. If they need more friction in order to ask the question, sometimes it doesn't matter to them. And so you can deflect a lot more of questions if you have some paywall, something. And so only the people that really matter and really care about this will be the ones that will pay, right?
You're floating. I'm giving you this, and I'm also giving you that. All right, Brian.
Can I compete with him? Can I compete with him?
Yes, please.
Yeah, certainly. So one of the reasons to charge for a user manual is to keep your overall costs lower and to be able to charge less for the product, because you won't have everybody that needs the user manual, and those who need it pay for it.
People who ask for the user manual often never open the damn thing. How many user manuals do we have on our shelves that never get cracked open? I know that. So the reference I was making is actually, I'm a fanatic on the pinball, and they often do not publish the rules of the game when they release the game, and it drives me bat-ass crazy. And some do, but often you don't. And the only way you can figure it out is either you play the game or somebody else releases a video that explains the rules of the damn game. It's annoying. And often you will go and they'll say, oh, manual coming soon, or, instructions coming soon. And it often takes months before that damn thing comes out. You would think they'd release it when the game comes out.
Maybe it's a collectible, People love collectibles, user manuals.
Nah, it's a PDF you can download. But usually also the communities often do it. They generate their own, they figure it out, and they generate their own manual. So there's a lot of sort of community generated ones too, as well. All right, here, let's go. We got more bad ideas. One more for you. Here we go. Here we go. Redact. This comes from Marivel Alicia Gamlin, who suggests, and I'll start with you, Brian, redact the details regarding critical vulnerabilities that should have been remediated 7 days ago. Why do you want to do that?
Oh, I mean, who's even saying that that's a bad idea? I mean, like I would argue that that's a good idea. Like, we just simply cannot share a lot of details about vulnerabilities because there is a whole world of people exploiting stuff out there, and so we just don't want to reduce.
There's a certain level of transparency you should.
Yes,
sir. Sanjay, why do you want to do this?
I mean, I think Brian summed it up pretty well there. I don't know if I don't think I can one up that one.
All right. Well,
produces more risk.
Sir, no, sir. For your inability to answer. All right. Good job, Brian, and good attempt, Sanjay. But don't worry. By the way, if you have not we got more people that want a nice warm handoff to the people of Vanta. Oh, that's great. Please go ahead and click on that poll and do that. And so we're just a little over 15 minutes away from ending this conversation, but I want to remind everybody to click the May 3rd event 2024. That's Hacking the Value of GRC, a super popular topic with our audience. It comes up again and again and again. And leave that up there for about a minute, but that will change to our 426 episode, which will be Hacking Your Cybersecurity Career. At the end, that link will change to our meetup that we're going to have at the very tail end of this event. And so I want you all to come to our meetup. Please come to that. It will be a ton of fun. If you've never done it before, I want to meet you. So please do come. All right, let's go into some more of these questions. I'll start with you, Brian. What is the toughest thing to show the sort of the moving state of trust? And I know that this is a solution that Vanta offers, and we'll get to this, Sanjay, in a second. But I mean, like with compliance, things are always a moving target. What's the thing that I guess people want to see the most that moves the most, I guess, is my question. That you would have to be reflected in a trust center.
Oh, what do people want to see, and then tie it
Want to see the most, but it is constantly in motion in some way.
Got it. I mean, to me, whether we're seeing it through the lens of a trust center or not trust center is simply how we're dealing with vulnerability and patch management. So I think across the industry, probably quite difficult to share from a trust center perspective. Certainly, if it's trust center that is publicly available to everybody. But I think there's a lot of focus from customers, rightfully, on how their vendors are addressing known vulnerabilities, and are they on top of them.
Kate Mullen, by the way, says, I tell my team that what we publicly display must be what we actually practice. Now, Sanjay, I know you would not say this of any of your customers, that they publicly display something that they don't actually do, but we have to assume that. But because I know this is a kind of a critical part of Vanta, is showing things that are constantly changing. What do you find? The same question I asked Brian just a second ago is, what do you find either, that is being demanded, requested, that is that thing that's constantly in motion?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's like you're maturing as an organization. That means you're putting more controls in place. That means like your infrastructure testing, your people testing, your vendor risk management is changing and evolving over time as like your company grows and becomes more complex. And so I think it is, in my opinion, it is like your compliance badges, your documentation that might change, but also your controls, right? And I think what people have done in the past is like, these are some arbitrary statements of like, I handle security like this. Here's our philosophy. Here's a set of bullet points. I think in the world of real-time monitoring, you can actually display now, hey, my service infrastructure is maintained. I have logging on all of my like critical infrastructure, et cetera. And those things may not change day to day, but the underlying data does change, right? And you are working to fix, patch, and make sure those controls are still passing. And I think under the level, it's like kind of a rolling, maybe a river that's moving, that you're trying to understand like how to patch certain things in different places to make sure your compliance is up to date, especially as you introduce new tools, new sub-processors into your system.
Let me skip ahead, because we haven't really addressed the main reason. I mean, why do we have trust centers? And I have to assume that the reason we have these is solely to improve the relationship management process, because organization A wants to work with organization B, but they need some level of trust. And yes, we've had processes before, but they're kludgy and whatnot. And the trust center is supposed to speed this up, improve this. What is it actually doing, Sanjay?
Yes, ultimately it's saying it's all like the public facing piece is like great. You can publicly display things, you might deflect questions, but the real power is two things. One is efficiency gain, right? People request documentation, a centralized place to access documentation. I need your SOC 2, it's password protected, or it's NDA gated. Now I have a centralized form, someone can fill it out, it goes into the system, it gets approved. There's also a set of rules you can build around it saying, hey, maybe we link this up to our Salesforce to say all existing customers, if we can find the domain, gets access to X, Y, and Z documents, right? And so instead of going to the back and forth via email, Slack, pinging things, everyone gets what they want when they want it based on a set of rules. And so it's moving towards this concept of touchless security reviews, right? I think the second piece is really important, is now you're able to actually effectively tie ROI and revenue directly to your trust center, right? If you're able to quantify, hey, John at acme.com is requesting access, they downloaded your SOC 2, you can link that back to your CRM and say, hey, we've had 10 SOC 2 downloads in the past 30 days. That equates to X million dollars of influence pipeline through your trust center. And now you can quantify that the value of your trust center to your CISO, to your executive team in a way that like you couldn't before, because there was all this back and forth communication in different mediums.
All right. How much time we got left here? Let's do this. I'm going to do a quick wrap up and then come back to your last thoughts on this discussion. And if you guys have any last questions, please do. Right now, click on the link for Hacking Your Cybersecurity Career. please register for our upcoming event. And then we're just quick little wrap up and we'll come back for last thoughts on our discussion. Whoops, here we go. So first, I want a huge thanks to Sanjay's company, Vanta, for sponsoring this very event. We greatly appreciate it. Vanta has been a spectacular sponsor of the CISO series. So thank you for sponsoring this. Second, starting soon, we've got Mike Levin, who's the deputy CISO for 3M. He will be participating on our show, Cybersecurity Headlines. It's a week in review. That's going to start at 3:30, so an hour and 40 minutes from now. And that'll be actually on YouTube. So if you go to our youtube.com/CISO series, or just go to our website, you'll find the link for that, and you can participate. It's short. It's only about 25 minutes. Also, join us for our 426-24 show. That's Hacking Your Cybersecurity Career, an hour of critical thinking. That's where it is. It's going to vanish in just a second, so click on it right now. An hour of critical thinking of how to level up your professional development. And now, Aaron, you can change it to our other link, which is, you can click on that anytime now. That's going to be our chat at the end of this, which we've got 9 more minutes. We've got 9 more minutes of it. And so we can handle a few more questions. Oh, and I see another one that's come in. Please stick around for that. The meetup is a lot of fun. So stick around for that. And then lastly, I want to just mention, you want to sponsor a Super Cyber Friday. Our next available date is not till June 14th. So please ping me if you would like to take that. That will be our next available date for Super Cyber Friday. All right. Now, let me ask this question, Brian. What haven't we talked about that we should have been?
I was kind of surprised in this day and age that we haven't talked more about not just automation in this space, but also AI. So everywhere I go, every conference, every meetup, whatever, it's almost like too much AI, and we didn't really get there at all today. All
right. Well, are you blaming me, or do you want to bring it up?
I'm in no position now that I've had this.
Or do you want to thank me for not bringing it up?
maybe a little bit of both, but when you ask the question, that's what's top of mind, because I'm just kind of so used to hearing it.
Well, because we hear a lot of AI in that it can, answer questions automatically for people using bots. I mean, that's kind of the most popular one that I've heard. Sanjay, you're nodding your head. Let me ask you, what is the element that's being used now? What do you see being used tomorrow with AI?
To me, you just hit the fascinating point. So right now, I think all companies, not just startups in this space, are experimenting internally with how AI can be used to address this space. I think we're all sort of seeing mixed results and figuring it out. I think when we look to the future, as Sanjay mentioned, and many of us have been talking about this for a while, this notion of almost kind of a universal translator. So we have the side, for good or bad, I have both sides of the equation. I have the customer trust team as well as the third-party risk team. And what I have seen historically, or at least in recent years, is more of an emphasis and investment on the customer side for asking the questions. And what I'm really looking for is, on the customer trust side, the folks who are putting together those answers and that information and populating the trust center, how do we make it easier for them? And I see the promise of AI as helping to facilitate this notion of kind of a universal translator to bring that together. But we're all sort of seeing and involved with how that plays out. So to me, that's the exciting thing as I look to the future.
I want to get to this question that Miguel has, which is really good. I'm going to put it up on the screen, but I don't know all of it, if all of it's going to show. Okay, yeah, not all of it's going to show, but I'll read all of it. And this is a really good question here. Have either of you dealt with InfoSec versus legal with sharing certain information that customers, quote, require prior to moving forward? Hey, well, we can't work with you unless we have this. So, for example, InfoSec may share minimal, quote, acceptable information / answers, but legal may look at it as an overall issue of, quote, is what we're sharing defensible? So they rather not share information versus having something that could be held against the company. This is an interesting question. Have either of you seen this, dealt with this? What was the net result, I guess?
Yeah, I can go first. I think the way that we've seen this happen is it's kind of like an onion, and you peel back the layers, right? Publicly, you might say it might be a little bit broader around the types of things that you do and you show in terms of your policies, like what you commit to, et cetera, right? And I think it's dependent then on the rules based on who is asking for what, right? And I think the answer here is, hey, there's a certain set of documents that may be public, they may be gated, right? They're gated by an NDA, they're gated by some request access flow, and there's an approval step to make sure that those people that ask questions and want this content are the ones that should have access to them. And then there's a third piece of it that's saying, hey, maybe that's one level deeper. And the next level deeper is like, hey, maybe there's things that are never going to be on our trust center, but we want to share like one-off with different customers, right? That might be actually a financial model that's sent out to a large bank. You want to be able to privately share those things, and not via email, but through a centralized place like a trust center, but only make sure that that customer sees it. So I see it as like kind of like role-based access control and persona-based gating, and that makes a lot of legal teams a little bit more comfortable sharing, as long as the right precautions are in place, like an NDA, right?
So I'll just add on real quick. Great question. I see it as a very, very healthy, ongoing conversation. Both of those stakeholders represent a perspective that's extremely useful and needs to be part of the equation.
All right. And Sanjay, I'm going to ask the question I asked Brian earlier, and your answer could be AI, and we can jump into AI. But what haven't we talked about that we should have been talking about?
I think it is AI. That's the problem. I think I touched what I.
By the way, we got applause from Dwayne for going 50 minutes without talking about it.
No, I think I touched upon I think the one thing that I did touch upon earlier before the AI bit is like, how do you make your security program and quantify the ROI of it as part of like a revenue driver? Everyone sees the security program as a blocker, right, to deals. Right. Either saying, cool, like the long pole of a deal closing, this critical $100K $1 million deal is on the security team. And you're like, yeah, I get it, but we get a ton of different inputs. We have 1,000 of these to deal with, right? And so I think the question now is like, time was a really important thing. Now you can actually quantify value because it's centralized. You can track those things. And so that was like the one piece of that we touched on really quickly that I think can be really interesting. I think the other piece is like, how can you have your trust center be an input and an insight generation into your program? I think often it's like everyone sees marketing pages, static pages. Yes, you get analytics. Yes, you get things. But I think the question here is like, can you then develop insights? And this leads into the AI piece, right? If people are clicking on specific areas or asking certain questions, you can aggregate that type of stuff into like, hey, X amount of people are asking about encryption. Do you do these things, right? And making an input into your security program, your product roadmap as well, I think is something that hasn't been seen before because we treat things as static pages. But just going back to the AI piece, I think exactly what Brian said. Translation layer, everyone has their set of requirements they want. Everyone has their set of content they want. The problem historically in the last 15, 20 years is like they want them in the format that they're comfortable with. And so AI, LLMs are really good at translation and synthesis. And I think you'll start to see a lot more of like, hey, it's an adapter, right? You have one piece of content here, you have one piece of content here. Now let's figure out what the gap of those things are, or the intersection of those things are, and then what are the gaps between that you can then follow up on. And so you might get to a point where like 100-person questionnaire gets to 20 instead of always asking the 100.
Very good. All right, let's wrap this sucker up. That was excellent. Now, here's my plea to you, the audience. At the end of this, I'm going to want you to all to click that link at the bottom of the screen, because that link is going to take you to another program called Toucan, which is our meetup portion of the event. And what you'll have to sort of register in. You can like use your Google account to quickly get logged in, but make sure that your microphone and your camera is on, and you will be a floating bubble. You will see other floating bubbles going by. If you want to join another bubble, you click on it, and all of a sudden you're having a conversation. But do yourself and all of us a favor. Don't make one giant bubble of 12 bubbles. That's what happened. Try to get conversations 3 or 4. You'll get more conversation going through. It's just 12. There's, most of the people are not talking and they're not engaging. So you should engage, and don't feel shy to break away from your bubble and join other bubbles. Okay? So that's my PSA for today, everybody. And if you've never participated, I want to meet you. Come say hello. Would love it. I want to say thank you to our guests. That would be Sanjay Padval over at Vanta. Hey, by the way, go click that little click the little bar chart and get a warm handoff to the fine people at Vanta. And also Brian Culp over at Box as well. Oh, let me ask you a quick question. Are you hiring over at Box, Brian?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, if you have inquiries about hiring over at Box, go talk to Brian. You will be in the meetup. Yes, Sanjay, you'll be in the meetup, right? Yep.
Yes.
You're hiring at Vanta? Yes.
Yep, always.
All right. Awesome. Well, let's wrap this sucker up.
And was formerly employed by Box back in the day. You know?
Were you?
We did overlap, which is funny, but we both worked there.
So I can guarantee that if you get employed by Box, you will then be hired by Vanta, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it works. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Brian. Thank you to the producers, Rich, Aaron, Andrew, for making this whole show awesome. Take us out, Aaron.